Hey, so I want to make a quick video on the Tesla API. Apparently, recently Tesla changed the method in which you can get the token, which runs all the other API calls. Um, it seems that none of the other API calls are affected. It's really just the way you get the token. And if you Google it, which I used online resources, there's this Tim Dorr. He has a great page I used previously to look at the commands and the APIs available, and then he actually started to document some of the new ways, the new way that Tesla allows you to get the authentication token. Someone reverse engineered it from the mobile app probably, and I think it's also a reflection of the using the two-factor authentication. Tesla's trying to make things more secure, which is great, but it does did mess up some of the earlier videos I made in terms of the Google App Script. And what you'll find is if you actually did use the Google App Script like I did, I think there's this SSO service, I think blocks the Google server IP addresses because I'm guessing maybe a bunch of people have made these calls and for safety it probably thinks it's some kind of attack, so it shut it down. So I can no longer get that to work. So what I did was I ported it over to Python and it works perfectly fine. Which I run it from Raspberry Pi, so it has my own IP address, and I'm not spamming it, so it's probably the reason why it hasn't shut it down. So you do want to be careful. You don't want to make a ton of calls. Frankly, you should only really make the call once every 45 days. You save the token, and then you refresh it every 45 days. So this website, if you Google Tesla API authentication, this Tim Dorr website comes up, and you can sort of look through. It's very helpful, explains things very well. So it tells you sort of what you need to do. It's still missing some elements of how you do the multi-factor authentication, but if you click this link up here on his GitHub page, there's a lot of people to describe how to do that. If you Google it, you'll see that as well. So I'll show you how I did it in Python. So in here, obviously you have to request import a whole bunch of different libraries to make this work. But essentially, it's a combination of using their APIs as well as using web pages that come up. So the first thing you have to do, and I coded it so that I'm not storing any email password. So this will just prompt it from the command line if you run it Python from command line. So it'll prompt you for email password and the passcode, which in my case I use like a authentication number that changes every once in a while. And so that's all configured on the Tesla website. So that's already all set up. And so, the first thing you do, you have to construct this URL, which is somewhat complicated. Down here, you have to construct this URL and call this URL with these various, quite a few different attributes, and it'll actually bring up like a web page. And if you print this out, if you show the URL, you can actually go to that on your browser and you can see a page come up. So that's actually what you're looking for is within that page, this request, it's a get. That response brings up a web page. If you actually look through the response and actually you view source on that same page, if you paste it into a browser, you'll see these attributes. I don't know what exactly they are. They're these values, CSRF, phase, process, so they're all stored in the web page. So you need to basically parse it out, and I already figured out how to do the the splits to get the attributes out of those HTML terms. So obviously this is quite fragile, so if something changes on the web page, this will break, but obviously, it should be relatively simple to fix. So this is the current position on the web page, which you can splice out and then put into these attributes here. So that's step one. You get that login page, and then you pull out all these attributes. The other thing important is you need to get this cookie, the session cookie, because it uses that cookie throughout the many 4 or 5 calls to maintain the state that it knows you're in the same session. Okay, and then the second part is then with this information, you can now go and authenticate the username and password. And so this is, if you look at the web page, same thing, it has username and password. So it's passing in these variables which you stripped off of the previous page, and then it additionally adds an email and password, which I collected from the command line prompt. And then this is a post request. You send these in. Again, you pass in this, pay attention that you pass in this this header with the cookie that you pulled down from the previous page. And this is a JSON payload. So then it brings up a secondary page, which then allows you to do the multi-factor authentication. And so you call this different URL, this is the same transaction ID that you pulled up from the previous page, and then you make another request, which is a get here, again passing in the same session cookie. And then you it'll bring up another response, but within that response there's this thing called factor ID that you need to pull out. And that's really, it's the method in which you're doing the second authentication, right? Whether it's, it's tied to your device, if you have multiple devices or different methods. So you need to pull out the correct factor ID. There could be more than one. I actually only have one, so I just picked that first one. And if you want to, you could obviously loop through however many you have and make sure you get the right one. And then you make the secondary call to verify with the factor ID, the transaction ID, and then the passcode, which I collected from the command line prompt. And mine is the number that changes every 60 seconds. So you have to put it, wait for the latest one every 60 seconds. So when that's all in there, you make this other call to verify multi-factor. It's another request post, another JSON type object, and then actually I think I misspoke earlier. This is not JSON. This is just a regular post. This one is JSON, and then yet again you pass in the header, the session cookie. So now you've passed multi-authentication. Now you need to get a series of steps to get a bunch of codes. And so this is the URL you pass again. This is actually very similar to the first one. And then the only difference is you're also passing in this payload of the transaction ID. And this is a post. And another important thing here is that you need to set this allow redirects to false. And Tim Dorr explains why in that page. I don't really understand all the reasons why, but you need to set that to false, pass in the session cookie, and then ultimately it'll give you a response which has a code in it. And again, this is on a web page or it's in a header somewhere, and so you have to strip it out using the splicing function, and you can pull it out of with this and then get this code. And then with that code, you trade that in for the bearer token, and this is the token that you're ultimately going to trade. You get a series of exchanges to get the ultimate access token that you want. So with this code, you call this API, and you pass in this post method for this this payload here, using the code you just obtained, and then some of the elements of the previous previous methods that you had generated. This code verifier was from step 1, and then you pass in another, send another post using JSON, and then again, as I mentioned, you have to repeatedly send this cookie to maintain the same session. And then the very last step is then you exchange that bearer token for the access token. And so this very final step, you call this URL with this payload. These are posted pretty universally. You can Google it, but they're I think somebody reverse engineered these values from an app somewhere, and so these are the the values you have to pass in to this URL. So you again send another post with the JSON, and this time the header, you don't send the session cookie, but you send in this bearer token with this payload, and you exchange that access token, and ultimately what happens is that response will get you the access token. It'll tell you when it expires, which is really just 45 days after the create date. You get a refresh token. I'm not sure really how to use that, but you get a refresh token, and then you get the create date. So I usually print these out on my command line, and then I just paste them into a config file, which you should keep safe. right? And then with that token, I send an email reminder when it's like a week prior to the 45 days to go do this again and grab a new one. So it's not, you know, super automated, but I certainly don't want to be calling this every single time, you know, because A, I don't think you need to, and B, I think I'm afraid that you can get locked out by Tesla. So this is all written in Python. Again, I had to do this because it seemed that Google Apps wasn't working for this anymore. But the rest of the APIs and the functions I have written previously all work fine once you have this. And this got me worried, so I actually rewrote everything. I ported everything over to Python that I had in my previous videos for the Google Apps script. So if you're interested in that, leave me a comment. I have those already. Got them hooked up into GitHub, so if you want to know how to do that or see the code for the Python version of all these API calls, I can show that to you and make some videos about that. So let me know. But this is a good workaround to getting the token you need to run the APIs. Okay, if you found this helpful, please feel free to like or subscribe, and have a good day.